Take us into this. How did this come about?
Well, we've been working for the release of Mr. Whelan for years, and certainly for the last 10 months to get Brittney Griner home. So it's been and certainly the negotiations are months long here. A lot of effort went into trying to get them both released, and it really only in the last week or so, David, where we believe we could get a deal for Brittney. And as the president said this morning, it wasn't a choice of one or the other. There was only one way we were going to get one American home, and that was going to be Brittney for Mr. Bout. So we go ahead and we enabled that deal, and now she's on her way home. The Russians have been treating Mr. Whelan very differently, very separately, based on sham espionage charges. And so it was just apparent to us, no matter how much we tried over the last weeks and months to include Mr. Whelan in a deal to get them both home, that the Russians just simply were not going to negotiate for that in good faith. That doesn't mean, as the president said, that we're giving up. Obviously, we were working on Mr. Whelan yesterday. We were working on him today, and I can guarantee you tomorrow and every day after that, we're going to continue to try to find a way to get Mr. Whelan back home with his family where he belongs.
So fairly early on in this process, at least according to news accounts, people focused on Mr. Bout, Viktor Bout, this arms dealer. Is there somebody else or something else that you have that you could negotiate with the Russians over Mr. Whelan about?
I think it'd be better for me not to negotiate here in public, David. The Russians have not been, again, negotiating in good faith for Mr. Whelan, at least not right now. We want to get to a point where those negotiations can bear fruit. So we are going to continue to talk to the Russians about what might make sense, what could be doable, and then see if it's doable on our side as well. So those discussions are ongoing. They're very active, but I think it'd probably be best if we don't discuss all the details in public.
So, Admiral, let me ask a different question. As I say, Mr. Bout was convicted of selling or trying to sell arms that would kill Americans down in Colombia, as I recall. So right. He was, we would say, a pretty bad actor. Is there a real asymmetry here between the offense committed by Brittney Griner on the one hand and what Mr. Bout was responsible for? Does this help national security to let somebody like that out?
We were focused on our national security yesterday before this deal. I guarantee you that going forward, we're still going to be focused on making sure we can defend our national security interests around the world. And now with Mr. Bout out on the street, we're obviously going to continue to stay focused on making sure we can defend ourselves, and that's not going to change.
Admiral, what does this do potentially in relations between the U.S. and Russia? Let me take one negative, then we can go to maybe some positives, which is there some concern about really almost encouraging Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, to maybe seize more Americans so he can get more negotiations going?
The president kind of addressed this morning when he talked about the fact that the State Department, as you know, has now a new designation for countries around the world that labels them for a detention risk. Russia's clearly on that list. Other nations are as well. And so we encourage Americans that are going to travel internationally, whether for pleasure or for business, to get to the State Department website and make sure you look that up, that you understand the risks over there. Obviously, Mr. Putin continues this effort to arrest and detain Americans wrongfully, and then try to negotiate for somebody that means more to him than he thinks our American means to us. What the president proved today was that these decisions, though tough, not taken lightly, given the national security concerns that you and I just talked about, but we're going to do what we have to do to help secure the release of Americans that are wrongfully detained.
John, this release is obviously incredibly important, particularly to Brittney Griner and her family, her wife and her family, without a doubt. There are also a lot of other issues on the agenda between the United States and Russia right now. Is there any prospect at all that starting some negotiation, whether directly or through the UAE, could lead to discussing other things? There's been a lot of talk, including by President Biden when President Macron came in, about the possibility of starting to talk at least about resolving Ukraine.
Getting Brittney home was the result of painstaking, thoughtful, deliberate negotiations, and that was done separate and distinct from our other issues with Russia. They are not related, and we don't think that there's going to be some sort of interconnection here between now there's sort of an opening with Russia on Brittney, so now maybe there could be an opening with respect to peace in Ukraine. Mr. Putin has proven he's not willing to sit down and negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine. President Zelensky has said that while he does want eventually to get to a negotiated settlement, now's not the time for him either. Mr. Putin continues to kill Ukrainians. He continues to strike civilian infrastructure. He continues to try to weaponize weather itself. And what we're going to do is stay focused on making sure that the Ukrainians can defend themselves against these threats in real time, to include additional air defense capabilities. There will be more coming from the United States. And we're going to make sure that if and when it comes to a negotiated settlement, President Zelensky can enter those negotiations with as strong a hand as possible. That effort will continue, and we are not relating the two together. And I think it would be imprudent for us to think that because we were able to get this deal, getting Brittney home, that that's somehow going to create an opening with respect to other tense relations with Russia.
And President Biden's made it clear that it's up to the Ukrainians ultimately whether they go to the negotiating table or not. But at the same time, it is a possibility. But to that point specifically about doing whatever needs to be done to encourage the Russians to modify their approach, do the drone strikes on Russian soil and Russian bases, does that help or hurt the situation?
I'll let the Ukrainians speak for their military operations. I won't do that. I would tell you that from the very beginning, right when this war started, we made it clear that we were going to do three things. We were going to support Ukraine. We were going to bolster our commitments to NATO, and we were not going to seek a conflict with Russia. And so from the very beginning 9 months ago, we have been concerned about escalation of this war, because escalating it beyond the violence that's already visited on the Ukrainian people is not only not good for the Ukrainian people, it's not good for our national security interests or those of our European allies and partners on the continent. Frankly, it's not good for the Russian people either. So we're constantly making sure that we are working to avoid a greater, larger conflict. And we're not going to feed into the narrative that Mr. Putin puts out in the public that this is the West versus Russia or the U.S. versus Russia. This is about Russia's invasion of a neighboring state that posed a threat to no one. So we're always concerned about making sure that we're thinking through escalation circumstances as appropriate.